when she's ready.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the invitation to participate today. This is very exciting for me, and I hope for the state of California. I run the Housing Trust Fund project of the Center for Community Change. I put the project together 30 years ago and have been working with housing trust funds across the country. So what I would have been asked to do is to explain housing trust funds a little bit as a solution to a lot of the very valuable conversation that we've had today. Is this going to work? Does it go to full screen? No?
It's working fine.
Anyway, the housing trust funds are a distinct idea that was created in the early 1980s as frankly, a solution to, or partial solution to, addressing the affordable housing needs that exist in this country. I think you've learned this today if you didn't already know it, fully understand how to provide affordable housing in this country. We've just not committed the resources to make that happen. If we did, it would happen. And what housing trust funds do is provide an ongoing dedicated source of public funding to a distinct fund. That's the classic definition of a housing trust fund, and they've been in operation since the early 80s. As you can see, there are more than 700 housing trust funds across the country. There are 47 states that have created housing trust funds, and embarrassingly, there are 4 states that created housing trust funds and somehow forgot to put any money into them, and sadly, California is one of those. So California actually created its housing trust fund back in the mid-1980s, and so there, for 30 years, we have actually failed to fund the State Housing Trust Fund. So other states and communities are definitely making advances with their housing trust funds. I'm not going to pretend that any of it is easy, and I'll talk about some of the obstacles that folks run into. I'm not going to read through every slide for the sake of time and keeping you awake. There are lots of advances that have been made with housing trust funds across the country. They're providing something slightly less than maybe $1 billion a year to support affordable housing. There are numerous revenue sources, public revenue sources, that are committed to housing trust funds. This list just shows you what other states have done. Without a question, the real estate transfer tax is the most popular dedicated revenue source for state housing trust funds. The second most popular are document recording fees. And those 2 revenue sources make up the bulk of what is supporting housing trust funds across the country. We talk a lot about the importance of affordable housing. Housing trust funds have been able to document the added economic benefits that come from investing in affordable housing, and to the point where one can easily make the statement that investing in affordable housing is good fiscal policy. It creates jobs, it adds to the tax base, it saves money in a number of different ways, which you've already heard about today. So other states, in not only supporting their state housing trust fund, but actually building resources for their state housing trust funds, have documented that through fairly detailed studies. And if you're interested in any of those, I'm happy to make them available. But it is also true that housing trust funds and the way we talk about them have to do with something very basic to every community, and that is just quite simply the value of a home to every single person in this country. If you think about any time in your life where you struggled to find an affordable house, and for me it's when I was waiting to get into graduate school. I stayed in this little crummy apartment over a bar that if my mother had known about, she would have driven to St. Louis to pick me up. But if that hadn't been available to me, I probably wouldn't have gotten into graduate school. So everybody has a story of some sort like that, and the availability of affordable housing across the country is crucial in enabling people to live the lives they want to live. As I indicated, California created their Housing Trust Fund in 1985. The intended revenue source was offshore oil drilling tax revenues. It really didn't materialize in much of a significant way. I think some $2 million was made available. You've heard about other items on this particular slide, but I do want to point out that cities and counties throughout California, some 30, probably more than that now, have created their own local housing trust funds with ongoing dedicated revenue sources. So cities and counties within the state are seeing the need to do this, and California probably at this point has the most rapidly growing rate of local housing trust funds of any state in the country. So just to summarize very quickly kind of how housing trust funds work, because we're talking about a public source of revenue, housing trust funds are administered by departments or agencies. We strongly encourage the creation of oversight boards. It brings a lot of expertise to the operation of the housing trust fund, but it also keeps that connection to communities, which I think with affordable housing is very important. Programs are usually defined. The money is given out through a request for proposals. Every time I ask anyone, any place in the country, why they like their housing trust fund, they say it is the most flexible money we have. So it can be used should a natural disaster impact the state. It's the housing trust fund that can be called upon to respond to that quickly, much more quickly than any other source of revenue that might be available. The same kind of thing for trying out new approaches. Housing trust funds have contributed significantly to the reduction in in providing housing for homeless people and in rehabilitation and foreclosure programs. They're demonstrating exactly what can happen because these funds can create new programs that more restrictive dollars coming from the federal government or even the state sometimes does not make possible. So there are lots of reasons for dedicating the money and having an ongoing revenue stream, as you've already heard from developers. Having some kind of reliable source of money means that they can put creative, effective developments together to provide affordable, safe homes. Because they know that this revenue stream is available to them. And we're always going to have people that need affordable homes in our communities. This isn't something that is going to magically go away. So recognizing that and understanding that we need that dedicated ongoing revenue source is critical. You've already heard about leveraging, but what does happen, in fact, with housing trust funds, and this has been shown consistently, is that having that revenue source available enables developers to access other funds, including tax credits and other state and federal funds that might not otherwise be coming to provide affordable housing. I was asked to share with you a few examples, and I'm only going to do three, and I'll do it quickly. Washington State has had a housing trust fund since the mid-1980s also. They actually have two housing trust funds, one that is supported through the capital budget, meaning primarily bonds, and a second one that commits document recording fees to address homelessness throughout the state. The two funds are very, very popular and have been used to do a number of creative elements within the development process. One is they sustain an operating and maintenance fund to help support the operating costs of developments that serve extremely low-income people. So it's important to recognize that virtually every housing trust fund in the country targets its money to lowest income households. Not entirely. They might do a set-aside, they might set a priority, but the intention with virtually every housing trust fund is to serve those most in need. Ohio Housing Trust Fund has been around for decades. It also uses a document recording fee. It's extremely popular. They actually put a cap on the Housing Trust Fund of $50 million a year from the document recording fees, and they have just lifted that this year, recognizing what a critical role the Housing Trust Fund is playing throughout the state. Illinois also has two housing trust funds. One is using the real estate transfer tax, and a second one that provides rental subsidies primarily is using a document recording fee. So this is just to illustrate that housing trust funds are doing a variety of different things, and having this kind of flexible, dedicated money enables the state to really look at what would be most effective in addressing affordable housing needs throughout the state. Next. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to Mr. Schwartz. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Really glad you're holding this hearing today. And I think the testimony you've heard has well documented the challenges the state's facing. I'm going to try to talk about a couple of potential solutions related to a resource that you and this body fully control. Unlike many of the federal programs that we have tried to influence over the years, this is something that you can control. And I hope you will find this an interesting proposition, actually two of them. I want to begin just by reminding you that this body created my organization, the California Housing Partnership, 25 years ago and a little bit, to provide leadership on affordable housing finance issues. And we've continued to do that. And we work with private and public financing sources. And we've helped nonprofit and local government housing agencies leverage more than $5 billion over that time. So this is our area of expertise, which is why I think I was asked to come speak to you. And let me plunge in. First thing, I want to make sure, just as a quick reminder, the way this tax credit is set up to work is after the costs of a projected development have been determined and rents have been set based on maximums for an income group that a locality has set as its target, the private debt is maximized, typically, with a couple of exceptions for serving homeless and other special populations. So we are working the private markets in this. This is not a public subsidy program here. We're leveraging both sides. And then whatever gap financing is available from local government is also sought. And then finally, the tax credits are intended by law and to function as gap financing. Now, to point out the connection to the previous speaker's comments, item number 4, those federal, state, and local grants are the things that we have lost the most of, which puts incredible pressure on the tax credit to try to fill gaps it was never designed to fill. And that brings us to some, I hope, are creative ideas here today. So the challenge is, we've talked about tax credits a little bit. Just a quick reminder, there is a 9% tax credit, and just think about it roughly. It's not actually a 9% credit, but it's worth more than twice the lower tax credit. And this 9% credit is strictly allocated by the federal government to each state based on a per capita basis. And last year, California received $2.30 per person of that 9% credit. So we are using that program already. We're using it, I think, very well. I think our leaders have done a good job with that in the Treasurer's office. The 4% tax credit, though, is not being used very well. And the tragedy here, the missed opportunity is, I say here it's an uncapped federal resource. That's not strictly true. To access the 4% credit, you must first obtain an allocation of private activity tax-exempt bonds. But the reason I call it uncapped, it's virtually uncapped, because right now we're not able to use all of our private activity tax-exempt bonds, perhaps as well as we'd like to, partly because the housing market and the low-income housing market has been so hurt by the loss of various funding programs. So we can essentially talk about this as an uncapped resource at the moment. There's plenty of room left in our state bond cap, and as you heard reference to earlier, there is a lot of bond cap going unclaimed right now nationally. And the last thing we want to do is invite Congress to take back that bond authority which brings these 4% tax credits. So we need to do better about using these. And it's, again, highly dependent on that gap financing. So I'm going to show you the next picture is another view of what Carol Galante showed you earlier of the loss, the combined loss of federal, state, and local financing over the last few years. And you can see that in a high of 2007, 2008 of over $2.5 billion available to developers here in California, we hit the low point in 2012, 2013, and last year wasn't a lot better, of well less than $1 billion. So that's a huge loss. If you're a developer, it's meant an inability to serve people at the same income levels. It's been meant a switch from creating new construction to having to look at lower cost solutions like buying existing buildings or refinancing existing properties. And so here is a slide which I did not create. It came from another source, which is noted there. But it does show you the almost direct correlation between the loss of federal, state, and local funds and the ability to create new construction units using this 4% tax credit program. I think Doug mentioned earlier that we were riding up in the car, and I was driving, so I was not trying to do any calculations. But Doug was kind enough to take some more recent numbers we just received from the Tax Credit Committee that are slightly different from this. And as he said, just to repeat, the average new construction volume from 2006 to 2008 was 5,300 units. After the loss of federal, state, and local funds, we dropped down to 2,800 units a year. So that's a huge hit on our ability to serve this population and to produce. So what can we do about that? There is a way to use the existing state low-income housing tax credit, which this body created in 1987 as a complement to the new federal low-income housing tax credit. And when this body created that credit, it set the amount initially at $70 million, indexed for inflation. And it had an initially fairly modest goal, and that goal was to, as I said, to complement the 9% credit when the credit was being used in non-high-cost areas. And I won't go into the technicalities of how those are defined, but essentially, if you're in a non-high-cost area, you got a lower federal 9% credit. So this program was designed primarily to balance that out so that developers in non-high-cost areas in California could have roughly equal resources. And here's just a quick snapshot. In recent years, you can see the statutory base number that this body authorized, and then the amount allowed for inflation. There's an adjustment done every year for any carry-forwards of unused state credits and also returned credits. And occasionally there are over-allocations, which the Treasurer's Office is allowed to do for various reasons. But the bottom line is we're now at about $93, $94 million of state tax credits, which sounds like it's a significant help. I don't want to underplay that. Unfortunately, without those local government funds and the state funds, this credit cannot be used by itself, this 4% credit, and the state credit combined cannot be used to create new housing. It's simply too low a value. This is one more look at recent allocations, which I'm going to skip over. So right now, out of that total pool, only 15% of the state credit is currently available to use combined with 4% federal credits. Again, the 4% federal credit is this virtually uncapped resource. If we had enough funding to match it, we could go back and leverage hundreds of millions of more dollars. And remembering that we are a state that sends far more tax revenues to Washington than we receive back, this is something that is really worth paying attention to. And part of the reason is that the California credit, when it was originally created with that other purpose, that less ambitious purpose, was limited to a 13% credit. And think of that roughly as you can get reimbursed for 13% of most of the costs of development. That doesn't get you very far versus, and then if you were leveraging the 9% federal credit, you could go higher. But if you're leveraging the 4% credit right now, you're limited to using it on only 13% of your costs. That's too low. to make a difference. So we have been looking into, because we run the numbers on hundreds of these transactions annually, is what would it take to allow that state credit to be used with the 4% federal credit, which there's no practical limit to right now. What would it take in terms of changing that credit percent? And it actually, on this slide you can see we have 50% as the proposed amount that would make a dramatic difference. And that's true, it would. To be really equal to a 9% resource, we'd have to be closer to 75% credit value for the state credit. And I'm not proposing that to you today because it's a pretty high number and it may be more ambitious, and concentrating more resources per property than we want to do. And I think there is a way. We've looked at some deals that this 50% credit can work well. By increasing the credit percentage to 50% and putting $300 million more into the state credit program, we believe the state could leverage more than $200 million in additional federal 4% credits that are currently going unused, and $400 million at the same time in federal private activity tax and bond financing. And again, there are no limits on those two resources, practically speaking, right now. That would result, by leveraging $600 million of federal resources that are not currently being used, we would be able to see at least 2,000 more affordable homes produced a year, housing nearly 5,000 low-income people, some of which you've heard described earlier. Homeless children could be some of those, seniors, frail seniors. And I did just a rough calculation because I know we're all cost-conscious here. The rough investment return is for about $62,500. This body could, of additional investment, this body could help create housing that would need no further state investment for at least 15 to 20 years. That's a pretty good return if you divide that $62,000 by that period of time. I think that's a very good investment. I want to just pause before I go on to the second idea with the Chairman's consent in case there are questions about this first idea, or would you like me to continue with the second one immediately?
Any questions at this point? We'll wait a bit. Please continue.
Okay. So the second idea is again related to the fact that California is paying more than its fair share of federal taxes. And currently, for every dollar that this body and the taxpayers of California are allocating to this program, 35% is going to Washington, D.C. Washington is taxing a federal state tax credit. Why? Because of the way it's being used, because of the way it was set up. And that is, it's set up essentially to be taxed as income that's generated to a limited partnership or a limited liability corporation, which are tax-paying entities that are building these developments. So other states have looked at this, and they have changed their tax credits from allocated tax credits, the way ours is, to what are called certificated credits. What does that mean in plain language? I'm not a tax attorney, but the research we've done says that what that means is a certificated credit, unlike an allocated credit, can be transferred more readily. It doesn't actually have to be sold or committed with the property, although we're proposing it be used in that way. And the main advantage is that by allowing the credit to be certificated, you don't have to require it. You could just allow it. Leave the choice to developers based on what they need and the structure of their deals. The certificated credit could be used by, there's typically a nonprofit general partner or managing member of these development entities, frankly, for a couple of reasons, one of which is to provide expertise on development, depending on the niche, sometimes service expertise, and also because the welfare tax exemption, Section 214G, requires a nonprofit entity be involved to recognize the charitable purpose. So almost all the transactions using tax credits in California involve a nonprofit corporation. If the credit is certificated, it can be given to that nonprofit corporation, which is part of the development entity, And that nonprofit can in turn sell it to the corporate investor, just the way the allocated credits are, just the way the allocated 4% federal credit is, except that there would be no federal taxes paid on the certificated credit being sold by the nonprofit, because it is a nonprofit entity that does not have to pay federal taxes on its income. So while some watchdogs might claim this sounds like tax evasion, I argue it is absolutely not tax evasion. I don't think the people of California and this body, when you authorized this program, particularly intended for 35 cents of every dollar to be sent to Washington when it was intended to create low-income housing. So by certificating the credit, we've calculated that allowing for time value of money and transactional costs, the value of the credit could be increased from about 65 cents in the dollar to as much as 90 cents in the dollar. That's more than a 40% increase. Even if this body decided not to expand and increase the credit the way the prior proposal called for, just doing this would increase the value of the existing credit you've authorized by 40%. So we hope that this is a proposal that you would like to consider, and I stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you. I think we'll have some questions, but let's perhaps have Mr. Mr. Chu, go ahead. Did you have a question?
I have a couple of just technical questions while we're on these presentations. Obviously, the 4% tax credit situation is one that many states have been confronting. Could you talk a little bit about what the experiences have been in other states, and have other states been better able to take advantage of 4% tax credits, and talk a little bit about how our state has attempted to better leverage those 4% credits?
Thank you, Assemblymember Chu. The main lesson we learned 15, 20 years ago looking around is the states that were doing the best using the federal 4% credit were those that had set up a dedicated state resource to match the credit and make the use of the two of them combined into a feasible financing source for development. So California actually did that very well. It created the multifamily housing program more than 15 years ago that was first funded with general fund allocations and then by Proposition 46 and Proposition 1C. And we were leveraging, as that earlier slide showed, quite a lot of 4% federal credit. The problem came as the combination of redevelopment elimination, which was a key source for matching federal 4% credits that I think both Mr. Shoemaker and Mr. Pontel referenced earlier, and the state housing bonds have been used. Prop 46, Prop 1C, there's just a little trickle left of money that's being recirculated, but those bonds are gone. So now we're in a situation that some of the other bigger users of 4% credits, like New York State, are not. New York State has a number of programs, in New York City as well, which continue to leverage the 4% credit at a huge rate. A number of other states have had success with the 4% credit program as well. Washington, even Texas, and some in the Southeast. And mostly they've done it by having a state resource that matches the 4% federal credit and makes it a usable resource by itself.
That, I think, leads nicely to the second question I have is, as part of your suggested solution around this, is that you suggest that we increase the amount of the California credit available by $300 million, and you mentioned that it would leverage an additional $600 million of federal resources. Could you talk a little bit about that level, the $300 million? Why that particular level? Why not? I know there are many that probably would want higher. There might be others who wonder if that is too high. Why is that the number that you would propose?
Well, I should start by saying higher would be better in our view, but $300 million seemed like a reasonable balancing point. The reason that $300 million, I think, is a good number is the last thing we want to do by proposing a change in this credit rate is to cannibalize the existing program, which you saw is a little under $100 million right now. And by increasing the credit rate from 13% to perhaps 50%, more than three and a half times, we need more credit. We need 3.5 more times credit to make sure that we don't cannibalize the existing program. So we have an existing $93, $94 million program. By our calculations, we'd need to have about $300 million more to make sure that we don't end up eroding the use of the existing credit, which we would not want to do.